Folks, I'm Herb Stevenson.
And I'm Ken Chapin.
We're here to do a follow-up on natural passages revealing unmarked doors to life. Ken has suggested that we have a conversation on intimacy, which I'm sure will be interesting one way or another.
Mhm.
So, welcome and thank you for participating with us on, for me, east of Cleveland, a sunny day, which at this time of year is unusual. So, Ken, what are your thoughts? How do you want to? You're the one who brought this up. What are you interested
Yeah.
in us chatting about?
Well, I guess a couple of things that come to mind around intimacy is, uh, I think there are probably many people, many definitions, many understandings of what intimacy is, and um, I I guess one of the things that I think would be fun to explore is maybe intimacy, generally speaking, and then maybe intimacy as it relates to the experience that men have, uh, either, intimacy with themselves, with other men, with other women, other people. Um,
Well,
and
okay.
yeah,
Let's see where it goes.
so maybe
That sounds like about 5 hours worth.
that's valuable. Well, I thought maybe a shortcut might be, over the years, I've heard you share uh, one of a story about one of your own experiences around intimacy, your trip to the airport, and always found that just in terms of a story and example of really focusing on intimacy from a certain angle, which I think might bypass a lot of stuff we might not want to talk about, but get us into what does intimacy look like on the ground in real time, and what was your experience with that? Because I think it was really relatable for me.
Sure.
Uh,
We could bring that in. I think I'll lay a little groundwork first. Um, Part of the reason we struggle with intimacy uh, is there's a negative connotation about being vulnerable, and we confuse intimacy with vulnerability. Vulnerability is part of intimacy. You can't have intimacy without vulnerability, but it's the combination of presence, being fully present, or another way of saying this is being resonant with each other at the same, let's just say, energy or level of presence. When that happens, that's when we have that sense of chemistry and direct connection. And it feels safe to what I call have bare attention. Bare attention is we are exclusively attending to each other. And it's kind of like the rest of the world fades away. And so that's the level of intimacy that we all, I believe, seek. I think we all, on a constant basis, want to feel. Because to me, intimacy, if connect to somebody, I feel validated. The way that it's expressed is I feel seen, I feel heard. Um, all of those things, I think, are stuff that all of us seek. And Um, so with that groundwork, I'll lay the story and how it fits into that framework. The story that Kim was referring to, this is close to 35, 40 years ago. I was traveling around the country and I was coming off of a workshop in Savannah, Georgia. And at the time, instead of taking a flight from Savannah up to Atlanta and on up, it was actually faster for me if we drove. Um, and the gentleman I was working with the night before, we had had dinner with a couple of his um employees. And as happens sometimes when you get all excited and the boss is taking you out to dinner um, and there's drinks, they got, let's just say, a little tipsy. And so the loose lips sink ships things happens where they're starting to. I'm curious. I'm asking questions about how's business and things, and without thinking, they start talking about the negatives. And I said to them, "Well, I hear that," and I said, "I'm aware if you complain or you're upset, you care, because if you didn't care, you wouldn't bother to even complain." When I said that to them and asked them then for a positive, they realized they'd probably drank too much, and they realized their boss was sitting there, and he was chuckling. He wasn't taking offense to it at all. And but what he did do was he had paid attention to what I had said about, is there anything positive, about working for the individual and this organization. And it was a big organization. Um, the next day we got to the airport. This is in the days where 5 minutes before the plane takes off, you could walk onto the plane. You walk right into the airport. And we're at 10 minutes till the airport's full in Atlanta. Uh, I'm focused on getting my bags and heading out. And he stops me to what I realized was for him an intimate moment and wanting to say thank you. And so he stopped and he paused to tell me. And at the time, I did not understand intimacy that well. And so he said, I wanted to thank you for what you said the night before and how you approached that with my employees and things. And I said, no problem. It's my pleasure. And grabbed my bag and walked off. And I realized in that moment something happened and I didn't know what it was, but I could tell something happened. Well, that led to, as you're aware, my developing the contact model, which is contact is the degree of vulnerability with the degree of presence. And if the higher the presence, the greater the vulnerability, the more intimacy. This one was because I was not present. He was. He opened the door to an intimate moment, um, which is, if you tie back to your request about men, is that leads to a feeling of embarrassment. And for men, if you're embarrassed, and it can go into then even feelings of shame, they would, and they're not going to talk about it because then that would create a situation to re-experience the shame. Um, it often ends the relationship, which is what happened. I even though we had a very successful business relationship, had developed a strong friendship. That moment had triggered uh, an embarrassment for him, and I said, I know something happened. I apologize, whatever. But at the time, 40 years ago, I didn't know. But the thrust of it is, especially male intimacy, is more difficult because we've really not been taught how to be present that well. We've been taught how to think, how to be rational, um, problem solvers. And so when something like that happens, it led me to, I spent the last almost 40 years now studying intimacy and contact. And that's where I come to the idea about bare attention and naked awareness. And naked awareness sounds contradictory, but it's really not. If I am fully aware, I can feel, let's just say, vulnerable or naked, and I'm not embarrassed. And when we have those moments, we realize there was something that just exchanged between the two of us that changed us both. And a lady, I can't remember her first name, Dr. Allenberg, I believe this, her name, came up with the idea of the intimate edge.
Right.
The intimate edge is when the two of us become resonant. We're both present enough so that the veil of vulnerability can come over. And when it touches, it creates intimacy. Now, most of us experience that romantically. We feel the either sexual energy or our heart opens and we have a chemistry. And unfortunately, that's about the only thing that most of us, most people experience in their lifetime. And the problem is then it becomes confusing because, if I have my heart open or I feel the sexual energy between us, well, we should do something about that. I mean, that's first thing we go to, especially guys. We're action oriented, and we're missing the moment. The intimacy of the moment is actually the validation of both of your existences. And we slow down enough to let that happen. Uh, we begin to our we our enrichment of life drastically goes up because you can realize. I know you have this with Henry, your dog. When you're with Henry, you get quiet, your heart opens up. Henry does the same thing, and you have it that moment. We don't think much about it. I have it, I have it with my dogs, and most people do who have any fondness for animals, but we don't associate and realize that's a form of intimacy that you can have with any person, an animal. You can have it with people who are tree huggers. They have it because they quiet down, get fully present, and feel the resonance of the moment, whether it be a tree or nature or whatever else. I do that with photographs. The reason I take so many photographs is I wait till I can feel what I'm seeing, and then I take a picture. And some of them come out beautiful. So
Yeah.
intimacy is if we come at it from a point of view of bare attention. Bare attention means no thoughts. I'm just attending, and naked awareness. I'm just fully present. The impact is I have this amazing experience. Now pause there. See what you have to say.
I'm thinking about, intimate moments with my dog and how it feels safe, easy, and natural. There's definitely very low risk. I mean, sometimes he, doesn't want me to pet him,
Sure.
or, sometimes let's just say sometimes he says no. Um, but it doesn't feel risky. And so having those kinds of experiences with animals feels like a safe place to practice, or at least to be able to go up into my head and think of a time when I shared a sweet moment with my dog, um, to sort of set the stage for, oh, there's an example of intimacy that feels safe or doesn't feel risky, different situation with people, um, because they have their own way of going about it. Maybe my dog isn't afraid of intimacy. He doesn't feel in danger emotionally in any way. So maybe that just is easier for him. But um, when so particularly with men, one of the things that I was thinking the other day is, um, the idea of men, whatever level of comfort they have, being shoulder to shoulder or side by side or working at something, whether it's me gardening with my dad, or that the side by side and the shoulder thing, whenever when two men are together, there's work being done. Um, I think just because of the way we might orient towards being in relationship with other people.
Well,
So maybe,
part of it is when we let go of the problem solving
right.
and we're only paying attention. So like if you and your dad are gardening and you're both gardening but fully aware of each other's presence, there's no expectations. And
Right.
so you can enjoy the moment because you feel it. And that's the thing about with men, using your example, my father in later years, my father was a construction worker, um, superintendent, and and later, and he was gone all the time, which I think I've tonight we got that because I was traveling so much for years. But he was gone all the time, and in later years, one day, shoulder to shoulder, sitting on the hood of a car, which kind of like the American graffiti type of people. That's what we were. Um, Looking ahead, not looking at me, he says, I didn't know I had a choice. And I said, okay. And he says, I just thought I had to work. My job was to work, and so to provide food, and never occurred to me that I would be allowed to or could even, take time to come to your ball games or do your various things. And, it's an intimate moment because it's him sharing a realization about himself and also simultaneous expression his regret. And it created I would call it a healing moment for us because it was something that was an unspoken that was now spoken. And so when we do things, at times it goes even further, like my father's, but other times it's just simple as just being with each other's presence. So I think I may have told you this years ago. I don't know if I did, but my dad was, he's a tough son of a bitch, especially on me as far as working. And um, he didn't want everybody, because I worked for him in construction, he didn't want anybody to ever say that he showed favoritism. Uh, but you go from that point of view, and it taught me a lot about dedication and commitment and all sorts of things. But we would sit without, which if you were to guess it would ever occur, we would sit and watch television on a Sunday afternoon as he got older and just hold hands. That's not something my family would do. And so that became an intimate moment. Also, there didn't need to be words spoken. It was just wanted to connect. And so partly how that changed, uh, I don't know if I ever shared this with you. You probably did, but when my dad's father died, we were the only part of the family that was there. And my dad was sitting, and my grandfather, who was nasty to my dad. So I never got close to him because I just thought he was just a mean old son of a bitch. But when dad was sitting there, grandpa reached out and wanted to hold his hand, and something happened between them that created a healing, and grandpa died. So afterwards I asked my dad, I said, "What? How many years has it been since he's treated you like that or even touched you?" And he looked at me, and he was 63 at the time, and he said, I think about 2 years old. I looked at him, I said, I don't know how we're going to do this, but I sure as hell don't wait for that. And so that started a process of asking for what I wanted, but it changed everything for all of us. And it wasn't right away that my dad and I got that close. It was, probably another 10, 15 years before we got to the point that he softened enough that we could actually sit and watch John Wayne movies, because that was so I think he'd watch TV. May have seen
Right.
it 40 times, but we'd watch John Wayne. So these are the kind of moments that, if you think about it, we let down all the expectations, we let down all of our wounds, we let down all the past, and this is especially with men. But the thing of it is, it's not just men. You know, Women have the same issues. They just show up be different, but the same issues is how do I just get present enough to allow the barriers to melt a little bit, to be slightly vulnerable, but do it in such a way that my presence is strong enough that it's like when Henry walks away and you don't get upset. When somebody doesn't do exactly what you want, you don't treat it as rejection or there you go again, treating me like, whatever our story is. It really requires being crystal clear in this moment. Mhm. And we have a hard time with that. Uh, just life, I guess. But when we can just slow down and just get present, and I like to practice like you do with Henry. I like to practice with looking in the eyes of the animals, and when they realize you're not threatening them, their eyes actually soften right in front of you, and they get very affectionate. And so people are the same way. I do the same thing when I work with various clients and things is I'll make eye contact with them, but I do it in such a way it's not a threat. I make sure it feels, if they're showing any discomfort, um, I don't sit there and stare. I just maintain eye contact. Um, the relationship or the work, whatever I'm doing, if I'm coaching or doing something of that nature, goes further. Person softens and suddenly realizes something. Go ahead.
I've been on the receiving end of that eye contact before, and so I have an entire story about that. Um, but I was just wondering what your, because eye contact sounds like a really sort of simple thing, and uh, in some cases, nothing could be further from the truth in terms of how easy it is, let's say to establish eye contact and maintaining eye contact is another chunk of work, let's say. And I wonder when you're sitting with a friend, a client, whoever it happens to be, and you are consciously aware of the fact that you are making eye contact in the way that you are. Have you ever imagined what it might be like to be on the receiving end of your own way of making and maintaining eye contact? Have you ever wonder what it's like for the other when you're doing that?
Well, if you say the other and you mean like when it's you, um, usually you tell me.
True.
So, but see, the point is you feel safe enough to tell me.
Sure.
That's why it's intimate. You feel safe enough to acknowledge that I see you and it's okay. There's a definition of intimacy that I don't necessarily fully subscribe to it, but it does describe it to a certain degree, which is intimacy is at that point of anxiety that you stay there. And even though you feel like you might be getting ready to make a fool of yourself, you just sit there until it relaxes and the intimacy sets in. Um, that's the point I was making earlier is when that happens, you feel seen and you realize you're probably as safe as you've ever been as far as being seen
Sure.
because your presence and your vulnerability have blended now into a moment of intimacy. To say it on a different thing, how do I um, experience it when somebody did it to me? Because that's partly how I learned it was I was in the presence of somebody who had done a whole lot of deep personal work. And when you looked in their eyes, you realized the only thing there was them resonating with you. And the only the actual words I said is, I don't know what it is, but I want whatever it is you got,
Look,
which is complete self-acceptance and presence, at least as far as you can do it. Um, that was,
what happened next? You
uh,
had that moment.
she
Yeah,
smiled.
but you had things next.
All I think she did was smile.
Yeah.
She just held the space. The same thing as what I do. I just hold you in a non-judgmental way. Um, you've heard me say this, but it's in prior podcasts I've said this is one of the simplest things and yet most difficult things that I suggest to clients, especially if they don't have a relationship with their kids or with their spouse, is to try going home and making soft eye contact, not your, if it's an executive, not your stare down through their soul and command them. It's literally to remember that this is the person you love and hold that for at least if you can for a minute and do it every day for 30 days and see what changes. And I said part of what's going to happen is first thing is because they're not used to it, they're going to say, "What are you looking at?" And your answer is you, and they don't do it enough. and leave it at that. Don't say anything else. The impact of that has been, especially if they have small kids, after about a week or so, they'll greet him at the door and chase his eyes down because it's validating to be seen. And so that's the first thing they want to do. It's like their spirit knows that I have this, I feel good. And the number of spouses who have gotten a hold of me and said, I don't know what you did, but thank you. So it's finding our own humanity again. I mean, that's really how I look at this. I think intimacy is a core issue of all of our experiences we're trying to get back to. We want to be seen, we want to see, we want to connect, we want to make contact, and a lot of things get in our way. So um, life gets in our way with all of our creative adjustments. That didn't feel good, so I'm not going to do that again. Well, that's because neither of you probably were present sufficiently enough to fully understand it. And the other thing is maturity. I mean, there's a certain part of growing up is kind of difficult because there's 9,000 rules that nobody wrote down, but you're supposed to figure them out. And you bounce off the walls and everything else. That's
A
why,
real bumpy ride.
yeah, that's why I keep saying God's got a sense of humor. He created us and gave us free will. Hi, folks. Herb Stevenson here. Um, we're had such a lively conversation between Ken and I on intimacy. We decided to turn it into two parts. So this is the end of part one. Um, our conversation will continue for another 30, 40 minutes in part two. And I hope you've enjoyed it up to this point, and I look forward to seeing you in part two. Thanks much. Take care and be well.